Hello and welcome to the 49ers First and 10 podcast. 10 minutes of the most up-to-date 49ers news first thing in the morning. I'm your host, Brianna McDonald, and I'm thrilled to kick off the first episode of the NFL Draft Month. Joining me is 49ers team reporter Lindsay Pilares. Lindsay, how are you today?
Good. It feels like we're turning a new leaf. I know we spent the last 3-ish months talking about the free agency frenzy, but it is officially draft month. So we are diving into all things draft for pretty much the rest of the episodes this month. So excited to talk about that.
Absolutely. Let's start by discussing the 49ers perspective on this year's draft. General Manager John Lynch gave a brief preview of the draft class while he was at the Combine. Can you share what he had to say about the prospects and what the team's approach is to this year's draft?
Absolutely. I think one big thing to note, and we've been talking about it a lot this offseason, so this is not new information, but the 49ers are back in the first round, which is really huge. This team has not made a first round draft selection since the 2021 season. I did get a chance to catch up with General Manager John Lynch at the Combine, so that was back in February, which feels like a long time ago at this point. But he did say, the draft is such a highly regarded event by this organization and for teams across the league. He called it the lifeblood of how the organization has been continuing to keep its roster that is championship caliber level year after year. 49ers are known for drafting and developing a lot of their players. When he talked specifically about this 2024 group of prospects, he said, outside of some of those quarterbacks that definitely are the big name blue chip players, there's less of those really, really big standouts and more depth, which really does suit the 49ers well, because given their very, very extended postseason run last season, they are back in the first round, but it is at the end of the first round. They have the 31st overall pick, so they're the second to last team picking on that first day of the draft.
Listen in as General Manager John Lynch shares his perspective on this year's draft class.
I think it's unique to each year, each round. You obviously have an overall philosophy, but we just like drafting good players, and it doesn't matter when. And sometimes guys don't get drafted, become free agents. And I think, if anything, we've showed that it doesn't quite matter where in that process you become part of our team. You're going to have an opportunity, and if you can help us, you'll be a part of us. So that's what we look for. We've got a lot of characteristics that we've defined over time that we value, and we try to focus in on those, both in the talent of the player and their makeup. So that's what we found to be successful. Yeah, and we got a first round pick for the first time in a long while. That's nice, but we really try to focus on making them all count, and they're all an opportunity to improve your organization, and we look at each one of those as such. And we pride ourselves on putting as much into the late rounds as we do into the early, and so we'll take them where they come, and we'll try to make the most of them.
Yeah, I love to hear just how optimistic he is about the talent in this year's class. It definitely gets me excited to see what moves we make in just a few weeks. So let's get into the draft class itself. What's the pool looking like? What can you tell us about the top position groups this year?
Yeah, so I was kind of looking at just what a bunch of draft analysts from all different networks and just different outlets were saying about top position groups. And I think it's very interesting because you kind of saw a rotation of the same 3 position groups. So whether it is offensive tackle, wide receiver, or quarterbacks, those 3 groups got shuffled for 1, 2, and 3. When you look at what the 49ers needs are at this point after free agency, not a bad top 3 groups to have up there. I think offensive line is definitely one to keep an eye out on. I always go back to that Christmas Day game against the Baltimore Ravens where, because it was truly just a very, very bad game in terms of injuries for the offensive line. You had Matt Pryor go to the Chicago Bears in free agency. So Jalen Moore is your big depth piece. And then you've got Colton McKivitz, who had a contract extension. He is the starting right guard. And then you've got your future Hall of Famer Trent Williams on the left side of the line. But depth is never a bad thing on the offensive line. So I think definitely at that tackle position, keep a lookout. I think tight end also, obviously not in the top 3 position groups, but something to look at. Wide receiver also could be very, very good for the 49ers because you've got your top 3 wide receivers in Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, Jawan Jennings, and then you've got Chris Conley coming back for another season. But the 49ers kept 6 wide receivers on last year's initial 53-man roster. Ray McLeod no longer here. He signed with the Atlanta Falcons in free agency. So you want to build out the depth at the wide receiver position. So again, not bad to see those 2 position groups in the top 3.
Great. I mean, that's promising for the team as they evaluate their draft strategy with the understanding of where the depth is in this draft. It sounds like this year's class aligns with the 49ers needs pretty well.
Yes, of course. I guess those are my draft predictions, right? Who knows what's going on with the actual experts we have in our organization. They're obviously looking at every position and best available depending on the 49ers draft position. And who knows if trades happen also the day of. There's just so many moving parts with the draft, but those are definitely some position groups to keep an eye out on. We've talked about it, you and I, at length in some of our free agency articles. But since the start of the new league year, the 49ers have added 11 players, whether it was by signing them in free agency or you've got Malik Collins who arrived via trade. 9 of those 11 new faces that were added since the start of the new league year were dedicated to defense and special teams. So I do suspect there will be some draft picks dedicated to the offensive side of the ball at the end of the month.
Definitely. So now I know that there's been plenty of names tied to the Niners leading up to the draft, and there's lists of mock drafts all across the internet. But Lindsay started Mock Draft Monday back up on 49ers.com this week and does an amazing job of consolidating all the projections into one neat place. Actually, Lindsay, would you like to share what the faithful should expect leading up to the draft?
Yeah, so expect, Mock Draft Monday to be a little bit different each week. I dove into what the experts were predicting for that very first round pick. We'll look at the different picks as we go over the course of the month, but first round for first mock draft, I thought it was pretty exciting. And there was definitely about 3 or 4 names that were kind of consensus predictions amongst all the outlets and analysts and draft experts. So we have Jordan Morgan. He's a tackle out of Arizona. Chris Jenkins, a defensive tackle out of Michigan. Ladd McConkey, who's a wide receiver out of Georgia, and Graham Barton, an offensive tackle out of Duke. So basically, everyone thought these 4 guys, it might be in this group. I'm very interested to see if all these draft experts are correct. And we don't actually have to wait that long because the draft starts on the 25th. So we've got 22 days separating us from finding out.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how the draft unfolds and who exactly the Niners take with that first round pick. But thank you, Lindsay, for joining me in today's episode. Be in the know on all the latest official 49ers news by following First and 10 on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Make sure to turn on the notifications for any breaking news updates. And thank you, Faithful, for tuning in.